One night the capital burned. A kingdom fell. He escaped with nothing but a necklace and a promise. Years later, the kingdom's name is a rumor. The boy who should have been a king lives in ruins, teaching children to hold a wooden sword. But some wounds never close. The same nobles who betrayed him now offer tax receipts and the bodies of whole villages as offerings. Count Cassius performs rituals. Children vanish. The city whispers, sacrifice. Then a book opens, a door in time. The book of fate drags him 10,000 years into the past, into a cult's tomb where the elixir sleeps. He fights monsters no living man should face. He learns a forbidden technique, or a thread, and for a moment becomes more than broken limbs and memory. He drinks half the elixir. He comes back with his arms reborn and a single aim: hunt the lord who turned nobles into monsters. He slips in with the dead. He confronts the count. Steel tears through aura and legend, and the city watches as the tide turns. He was a prince left for dead. He became a sword with a name. Now the last heir of Manhwa must decide: restore a kingdom or remake the world in fire. This is the story of a lost prince who learned to cut time itself and returned to finish what was stolen. Deep within the secluded castle that stood at the edge of Kushan, several warriors made their way through the shadowy corridors. One of the individuals questioned whether their information might be incorrect, but his companion assured him that it had come directly from Lord Cassius, so it had to be accurate. While the first man remained bewildered, the second man remarked on his astonishment at the absence of any magical creatures, noting further that not even a single ant was visible to him. His companion suggested that the possible cause was a rumor circulating about Lord's impending arrival. The other man nodded in agreement, finding the reasoning completely sensible given the circumstances. As the men wandered, they came across an unusual location. They questioned what it could be, and if it had been there for a long time, particularly because it was missing from the map. At the same time, one member of the group gestured toward a doorway and the staircase that ascended beyond it. One of the men proposed that they dispatch a person to investigate the area that seemed suspicious. Lord's frustration grew as he clarified that responsibility for the upper floor belonged to the gang, confidently extended their finger toward the chosen location, and declared that this was where they would be going. He directed the man who had recommended inspecting the area to lead the way, causing the man to react with astonishment at being chosen. His voice, edged with irritation, barked his command once more, demanding to know whether he needed to repeat himself yet again. The man wasted no time in following instructions and stepped ahead. They soon realized that not a single person was there. He let his master know about what had happened. Without warning, a pack of ferocious, wolf-like creatures with glowing red eyes emerged, launching a sudden assault on the group. The creatures moved closer to, and his companions. Without warning, the figure lunged toward them, causing fear to surge through. The group's troubles only grew worse when every door and exit in the building became locked tight, forcing them to remain inside and confront the fierce creatures. The men reacted with disbelief and astonishment. The area was filled with countless wild animals encircling the scene. As one of the group cried out in panic, desperately wondering what their next move should be, scolded him sharply, insisting that survival depended on their willingness to stand and fight. He shouted angrily at his soldiers, insulting their intelligence, and commanded them to face the approaching creatures without hesitation. As the intense fight erupted, the men were swiftly overpowered, each succumbing in turn to the lethal bites of the wild creatures. At the very moment faced certain death, an unknown figure struck down the creature that threatened his life. A stranger emerged unexpectedly and ridiculed him, questioning whether he considered himself to be a helpless damsel needing rescue. The lone man who remained alive lifted his gaze as Lord made his entrance. He noted that the rescue had come at exactly the right moment. Lord, brimming with confidence, instructed to pay close attention as he prepared to engage in battle. Displaying exceptional expertise, the individual handled the sword with the precision and grace characteristic of a true master. Began his journey, determined to confront the wild and dangerous creatures that awaited him. Wielding his radiant weapon, he swiftly sliced off the head of one of the creatures. The remaining creatures lunged at him together, moving with the unity of a hunting group. In mere moments, he swiftly defeated every opponent, dispatching each with incredible speed. The remaining men were frozen, overwhelmed by a mix of disbelief and admiration. Gazed down at the lifeless bodies of the creatures strewn across the ground. Looked on with awe, marveling at the overwhelming strength that Lord possessed. He firmly believed that light existed in a realm far beyond ordinary warriors. From afar, observed and speculated about the type of reward Count Cassius might choose to present for his recent accomplishment. His voice carried a sharp edge, as he remarked that he was fully capable of managing the entire situation on his own, directing his words at. Responded with a frosty tone, pointing out that while spoke impressively, his abilities with a sword were lacking. She suggested that he would need to put in more effort with his training if he truly wished to grow more powerful. Responded confidently, promising that he would follow through with exactly that. The story moves to the crumbling remains of, located within the city of Kushan. A man approached and questioned the reason for his tardiness. Offered an apology, mentioning that an unexpected issue had arisen. The man, his voice edged with concern, informed him that Count Cassius had already arrived a while earlier, and that circumstances were unfavorable. Inquired about the situation, wanting to understand what had occurred. The man revealed that the Count had departed with the children, leaving behind only a scroll for him. Unrolled the scroll, and discovered it contained instructions to assassinate a person called. The messenger's eyes widened in disbelief as he listened to the news he was tasked to deliver. The target's name came to light, Blood Count. Known as a formidable vampire and an expert, he held dominion over the city of. During this time, Count Cassius held dominion over the city of Kushan. The city of Kasha remained under the control of Blood Count, whose constant clashes with, and his group created ongoing tension. Because of this rivalry, and his friends often had to carry out unpleasant tasks just to earn Cassius's backing. The man mourned their predicament, sharing that Lord's only wish had been to flee with the children and find a quiet life, while he bitterly blamed the Count he had faithfully served for nearly a decade. The man attempted to prevent from leaving, cautioning him that was a pure-blooded vampire. Responded with determination, explaining that his life held no purpose unless he could be with his siblings, the children. The man looked at with surprise, remarking that he had only just come back, and then questioned where planned to go while he was in such a condition. Pressed for an immediate departure, urgently motivated by the fact that the children had been abducted. The man issued a serious warning about the danger, making it clear that commanded a vast number of skilled vampires, some of whom were even mightier than experts. Made it clear that he wasn't simply asking, he was commanding Lord to obey. Paused for a brief second, uncertainty flickering across his face, before he finally gave in and nodded his acceptance. Expressed his wish for Lord to remain with their siblings and look after them. With a look of determination, he assured everyone that victory was certain and that he would return to set things right. As and the others walked off, his hand curled into a tight fist. He resolved privately that he would refuse to follow this command for once. The story then shifts to an earlier moment, transporting the audience to March 11th, 1337 in the kingdom. In that moment, the Queen of the Kingdom gave a firm command to the Knight Commander, instructing him to depart with. She planned to remain behind and defend their location. However, rejected her command, declaring his determination to stay by her side and shield her no matter what happened. The Queen, unwavering, told him that his true duty was no longer to safeguard her, but to ensure the survival of the royal bloodline. Found himself unable to turn down the Queen's command. The Queen shifted her gaze to her second son, urging him with earnest eyes to pay close attention to her words, and to find a way to endure, no matter the circumstances. She explained to him that the women of the family were responsible for safeguarding the royal bloodline for those who would come after them, and reminded him that he also had an obligation to uphold his role within the royal family. The young prince, tears streaming down his face, could not bring himself to flee by himself. His mother gently fastened a necklace around his neck, promising him that it would definitely be of help. She begged him to bring the royal family back to power. When witnessed the scene before him, he felt a deep sense of admiration for the Queen's selfless act. The Knight Commander pledged his life in loyal service to the prince. reflected on the sorrowful moments that had unfolded in the past. The place where the capital had gone up in flames. He had not been able to save the king and queen, escaping with nothing but the second prince held tightly in his arms. That day marked the prince's 13th birthday. The prince, having seen his family killed before his eyes, simply gazed wordlessly at the fiery sky above. In this way, the Night Kingdom of, which had endured for 5 centuries, came to its end. Remembered the way they slipped past the Empire's troops, traveling carefully along the planned path to safety. Their group, made up of nearly 20 knights, escorted the young lord and lady, the final heirs of the Marquis family, through the dangerous journey. The deadline was set for the 1st of April. They managed to make it past the border and secretly found refuge on a departing ship. They journeyed from Glory Land to Rover Land while a violent storm raged around them. On August 23rd of that year, they reached Rover Land, a chaotic territory known as a haven for outlaws and those on the run. Wrapped up his account by reflecting on the passage of 2 months since their group had reached the city of Kushan. During their journey, numerous knights had lost their lives, and now only a dozen remained, himself included. Went on with his memories, describing how his duty was to safeguard His Highness, the second prince, who had become the sole rightful successor. Along with the prince, he was also responsible for watching over the remaining heirs of the dukes, marquises, and counts. He promises himself that he will keep them safe, regardless of the consequences, even if it means facing humiliation and hardship along the way. The story transitions, too, where the grand halls of Blood Count's castle come into view. At that location, could be observed engaged in battle. He quietly urged himself to endure just a bit more, silently hoping that Prince remained unharmed. Entered the shadowy chamber where the throne stood. As he stepped into the hall, he discovered the fallen warriors who had once accompanied, sprawled across the floor. He caught sight of blood covering him, and a sword lodged deep in his chest. Rushed onto the scene, his voice filled with concern as he searched for. He discovers that the man is gravely injured. With a gentle smile, she informed him that everything had come to an end. His expression revealed his astonishment. They questioned whether the kingdom's bloodline had continued. All the vows they had made for a joyful tomorrow, along with their hardships and dreams, seemed destined to conclude in this manner. Despite the setbacks, he remains determined, insisting to himself that this cannot be the way things conclude. Even though feels overwhelmed, he pushes himself to his feet and lifts the wounded, his resolve unshaken as he decides he must rescue him. 3 years had passed, and once again the story shifted back to the devastated remains of, nestled within the city of Kushan. The area remained peaceful as the children enjoyed themselves, laughing and playing together in harmony. Shouted to get attention while worked on repairing the roof from atop a nearby house. His face lit up with joy when he noticed that had come back safely. While was making his way down the ladder, he suddenly lost his footing and tumbled to the ground. Glanced at with concern, searching his face for any sign of distress. Confirmed that he was present and wanted to know what the Count had said. In response, explained that the answer remained unchanged. The Count insisted they wait for another month. Agreed to the arrangement, expressing confidence that they could handle things for the time being and promising to bring up the request again the following month. Reprimanded for taking on such strenuous tasks. Responded by explaining that he was unable to force the children to comply. In turn, reminded him that these children were no longer young, as they had already matured. Remains determined to safeguard them, promising to stand by their side regardless of how much they change. Let out a deep sigh, addressing as, and revealed that he already anticipated the words was about to repeat, just as he always did. Accurately anticipated that, was about to wish for an elixir. Responds with visible frustration, making it clear that the statement is true. The explanation follows that the elixir is known as the medicine of life, an age-old, extraordinary potion that remains impossible to reproduce using current magical methods. Rumors claim that this remarkable elixir was discovered in the dungeon 2 centuries earlier. Waved off the suggestion of the elixir, scoffing at it as nothing more than a superstitious rumor passed down through generations. He casually questioned himself, brushing off any concerns and insisting that nothing significant troubled him in his everyday routine. Noticing his lack of concern, recommended they change the topic. Despite his hopes, acknowledges that the extraordinary event he once experienced is unlikely to recur. Without warning, a group of children came running toward them, their faces filled with alarm as they called out desperately for their master. She intended to caution him, urging him to stay alert. With quick reflexes, brought up his armored arm just in time to shield himself from a flying piece of wood. He turned toward them, a smile on his face, and explained that he had just completed repairing the roof, hoping it would stay intact this time. Walked over to one of the boys and placed the wooden sword in his hand, reminding him firmly that he should never let go of his weapon again, regardless of the situation. The boy, clearly puzzled, insists that he had been gripping it firmly the whole time. Began instructing him on the proper technique, pointing out that success depended on more than simply holding on tightly. He emphasized the importance of using his legs for support and balancing his weight evenly across his whole body. He then encourages him to picture his rival within his thoughts. The moment begins to focus. Vivid recollections of his fierce and bloody clash with Count surged through his thoughts. The Count delivered a strong strike, yet his opponent successfully raised his guard and stopped the attack. He remembered that having someone to look after had given him the courage to keep going. He repeatedly claimed that death could not touch him. He was driven by the need to safeguard what mattered most to him. With a sudden burst of speed, the Count advanced and with a single forceful motion cut off's arm. Ignored the pain and pressed on, driving himself forward with determination as he targeted the Count's neck with his attack. In the height of his memory, he releases his energy and strikes the wooden practice dummy with such intensity that it splits cleanly into two pieces. And the children froze in disbelief, quietly whispered's name, while a child cried out in alarm that the master had smashed the wooden horse. Suddenly regained his awareness, his expression clouded with bewilderment. He expresses regret to the group, explaining that he intended only to guide them but unintentionally applied excessive strength and damaged the dummy. He assures them that he will repair it afterward. At the same time, a different child bursts onto the scene, clearly frightened, desperately seeking out Master to report that something awful has occurred. He clarifies that the conversation concerns Daisy and Cyclone. His face suddenly darkens with worry as an uneasy sense of foreboding washes over him. Hurried toward a nearby building, his mind troubled by the intense scent of blood in the air. He realized it was far too overwhelming to have come from an ordinary argument between children. He rushed into the room, shouting for them, but instead discovered a young man and a girl locked in a fierce, life-or-death duel with real swords. The red-haired girl was revealed to be Daisy, a member of the family. Cyclone, recognized by his blue hair, also belonged to that same family. Without warning, who served under Count Cassius, made his entrance. He acknowledged his presence and wasted no time poking fun at how long had been away. Abruptly demands to know the situation. Forced a tense smile and explained that he had been in the middle of an interview. Stared in shock, unable to believe he had just heard the word interview. Revealed that he had been assessing Daisy and Cyclone, hoping to see if they had potential, as he was considering making them his personal disciples. After sharing this, he instructed both of them to move out of the way. His anger flared as he demanded to know what gave the right to consider mingling his inferior bloodline with anyone else. Responded with a sarcastic remark, suggesting that becoming his most insignificant follower would be the only option. It seemed preferable to remaining under the command of someone who had suffered the loss of his limbs and was now considered a failure. Wondered aloud whether Count Cassius was aware of the situation. Dismissed the question with a scoff, clarifying that failed to grasp the reality of the situation, and insisting that someone as occupied as the Count wouldn't bother with minor details. Realized that must have arrived by himself, fully aware that this territory was owned by his family. Acknowledged that he had arrived fully understanding what was going on. A rumor circulated that the renowned had lost his arms and legs as a result of an encounter with a group of youngsters. Feels his temper rise as he listens to the tone uses with him. quietly questions in his mind whether, given his current physical state, is truly capable of keeping them safe. Issued a strict warning, making it clear that if the man so much as laid a finger on the children or refused to leave without causing trouble, he would not hesitate to end the man's life himself. Offered a faint, skeptical smile, clearly unconvinced that would follow through with his warning. Before he could complete his thought, struck with remarkable speed. Soldiers intercepted the assault, raising their swords to shield themselves. They were taken aback by his unexpected strength, realizing he possessed the abilities of a low-level expert. Believed that his opponents stood no chance against him, and mentally reminded them not to make the mistake of underestimating. Summoned his strength and launched a powerful assault, his energy crackling with intensity. His followers were overcome in a matter of moments. Watched with admiration, applauding and expressing that his brother hadn't changed at all and was still incredible. Observes that newcomers nowadays seem completely fearless. Gently urges him to show a bit more kindness. His opponent, being new to the scene, lacks experience. Observes that resentment toward him remains strong. At first, refuses to admit it. His face suddenly darkened, and a menacing, blood-red aura enveloped him as he himself for battle. Understands that continuing the battle any longer in his weakened condition is impossible. He resolves to finish everything with one decisive strike. He suddenly lunges at, confident that his swift move has taken him off guard. Effortlessly halted his opponent's advance, relying solely on the powerful aura that enveloped him. Sword snapped under the intense pressure of the collision. Looked at him with disdain, questioning the pitiful expression on his face and bluntly informing him that his spirit had been utterly broken. Reels in disbelief while relentlessly taunts him, questioning whether had assumed he was incapable of climbing to the top tiers. He explained that this was the reason he had emphasized how crucial it was to join the. Glanced nervously at his surroundings, uncertain about his next move. Fixed Daisy and Cyclone with a menacing stare, causing both to shake with fear as he warned them, questioning whether he should eliminate them individually. Comes to the conclusion that a deadly confrontation cannot be avoided. He realized that, no matter what happened, he needed to ensure the children's safety. Begged to stop, pointing out that there were kids watching. Couldn't help but burst into laughter, unable to accept what he was hearing as true. He taunts, questioning in a sneering tone whether has resorted to pleading with him. Admits the truth without hesitation, letting his sword fall to the ground before sinking to his knees. Responded by saying that things wouldn't be so simple, and mentioned that he needed to get his body ready first. Without hesitation, he launches a relentless assault on, showing no mercy as he strikes again and again. He struck the opponent's face with a series of punches, eventually sending him crashing to the ground. With impressive force, she delivers a strong kick. Planted his foot firmly on, who lay sprawled on the ground, feebly pleading for mercy and uttering desperate apologies. After pausing to consider, his lips curled into a harsh, unforgiving smile. She describes herself as gentle and decides that she has done enough for now. He departed from the area, assuring the others that he would return the following day. One of the children turns to their fallen master, worry etched on their face, and wonders desperately what their next step will be. Comforted the group, letting them know that everything was all right because he had managed to keep them safe. Later on, approached Daisy and Cyclone, wanting to know their reasons for their actions. They wondered what it would take for someone to truly join's family. Cyclone bowed his head, expressing regret to his master. Daisy stayed quiet, her lips pressed together as she glared with bold, red eyes that showed she would not back down. Daisy quietly cursed under her breath, which made stare at her in disbelief as he tried to confirm what she had just uttered. Daisy responded with boldness, questioning what could possibly prevent her from serving under Cassius, and pointed out that Cassius himself had once held the position of his subordinate. Demanded with anger in his voice whether she was truly unaware of the reason. He reveals that Cassius desires to become a vampire purely out of selfish ambition, and as a result of Cassius's actions, both their friends and relatives lost their lives. He gestured toward his artificial limbs, showing how his own fate had turned out this way. He looked at her with disbelief, questioning whether she truly wished to continue serving him, simply to survive by feeding on blood. Daisy's temper flared as she yelled at him, insisting that her life was not his concern and questioning whether he thought he was her father. Through her tears, she kept screaming, insisting that only she could choose the course of her own life. He insists that he should stop interfering in matters that don't concern him and focus on his own life instead. Once she had finished expressing her frustration, she stood up abruptly and left the room in a huff. Cyclone attempted to soothe Daisy's nerves before facing, explaining that Daisy's harsh words weren't truly how she felt. He mentions his understanding that choosing to kneel in that moment demands significant bravery. He observed that his master appeared to be suffering greatly and suggested fetching a healing potion from Uncle to help. Offered a subtle smile to show his gratitude. Just then bursts into the room, his face filled with worry as he rushes to check on his well-being. Informed him that a young girl named Lena had visited. He was informed that, according to Daisy, and had gotten into a fight and had gotten hurt during the altercation. The child approached him, seeking assistance. At that moment, Lena understood she had accidentally exposed Daisy's secret and immediately worried that Daisy would be furious if she discovered what Lena had done. Acknowledged that Daisy was truly responsible for the action. Finds the situation amusing and begins to laugh. The character expressed gratitude to everyone for showing concern. Handed the healing potion to, who accepted it and offered Daisy a quiet gesture of gratitude. Later found himself sitting by himself, racked by a harsh, uncontrollable cough. He let out a heavy sigh while examining his prosthetic hand, now smeared with blood, and reflected that if his core remained undamaged, someone like would never pose a challenge to him. He quickly pushes those thoughts aside, reminding himself that nothing is more important right now than keeping the children safe. Despite everything, he still felt anxious about coming back the following day. Comes to the unsettling conclusion that, ultimately, he may be forced to resort to that option. He produces the necklace that belongs to the royal family. She considered selling the item to ensure the children's safety. He understood that items such as the royal seal were too risky to sell, since the empire would surely hunt them down. Because of this, the necklace was the only possession he could safely trade. Gazed at the Book of Fate, his mind filled with curiosity about the reasons behind its status as a treasured possession of the royal family. According to the calendar, on March 17th in the year 4673, he discovered an entry describing a hidden church belonging to a mysterious cult, where the atmosphere was thick with a foreboding promise. Feels a wave of shock as he realizes he can read and comprehend the ancient language inscribed in the book's pages. Without warning, an intense glow radiated from the book, and the symbol of the sacred star became visible. Suddenly vanished from his room without a trace. Unexpectedly sprints through a shadowy hallway. He tried to make sense of the situation, confused about how everything had changed so quickly when only moments before he had been quietly reading his book. He comes to understand that the events unfolding before him are genuine and not a mere trick of the mind. He realized he was standing in the dungeon, though everything appeared untouched and newly built. He comes to a halt among a crowd dressed in robes like his, feeling uncertain about their identities and the situation unfolding around him. He overhears a voice announcing that there is an intruder inside the church. The leader instructs the group to prioritize obtaining the elixir above all else. His eyes widened in disbelief as the mention of the word elixir caught him completely off guard. He pieces together the recent events, the appearance of the new dungeon, the date referenced in the ancient book, and the story claiming the elixir was first found in the original dungeon. He realizes, with amazement, that he has somehow been transported 10,000 years into the distant past. He affirms the authenticity of the opportunity. The revelation dawned that the elixir truly existed in this very place. At the same time, a cult leader reassures the others that the elixir remains unharmed. Believes that possessing it will allow him to recover all that has slipped away from him. Became aware that a group of 12 individuals was close by. At that moment, he weighs the idea of ending their lives immediately and claiming the elixir for himself. Before the offering could take place, the cult leader commanded the followers to split into pairs and begin searching for the intruder. The leader starts distributing responsibilities among the group members. He then instructed to accompany and guard the northern passage. Remains motionless, his mind racing as he tries to figure out how anyone there could possibly recognize him. He suspects that they identified him as a former ally, understanding that the effects of the Holy Star's potent magic led to this situation, and begins to question what the Book of Fate really is. The partner assigned to him noticed his distracted state and questioned the reason for his idleness, urging him to get moving. Chose to cooperate for the time being, hoping to learn more and patiently watch for the perfect moment to act. He proceeds after, venturing into the shadowy hallway. As the group continues along their path, they come across a woman standing ahead, her hair shining with a golden hue. As and his companion made their way through the corridor, an unexpected assault caught them off guard. An unexpected attacker, distinguished by bright yellow hair and wielding a luminous purple sword, sliced cleanly in two. Observed an unusual, see-through light flicker the moment his blade struck against his assailants. Successfully deflected the attacker's blow, but he noticed that every time their weapons clashed, his own sword suffered more damage. He observes the attacker's sword, realizing it bears damage as well, and reflects on the unusual strength it seems to possess. Comes to the startling conclusion that the energy surrounding the sword is far from ordinary, sensing that something unusual is taking place. He considers trying out this newfound ability on his own. Spots a group of terrified children crouching in the shadows close by. Stood behind the yellow-haired assailant, questioning in his mind the reason for their presence. Stepped forward, placing herself between the children and any danger. She fixed a stern gaze on, admonishing him and demanding to know why a knight like him would support a cult known for abducting children. She accuses him of intending to use them as living sacrifices. For a brief instant, thoughts of his own children and the joyful life they shared filled his mind. Before the other cult members showed up to the scene, they acted as though they had no knowledge of the unfolding events. A member of the cult inquires whether was defeated by the intruder. Before the other has a chance to speak further, spins around and eliminates the cult members in one quick, decisive motion. He appears frozen in shock. Explained to her that they shared a common goal and needed to join forces in the battle ahead. A pair of additional cult members entered the scene. They discover that the intruder has already taken the lives of 3 members of their group. One of the group urgently called out to a companion, urging them to move faster and assist. Spun around and swiftly severed the head of one of his attackers. A cultist caught sight of ending the life of a fellow member, and with his final breath, condemned for his treachery. Loomed above the fallen bodies, explaining to the Nidus that her pretend struggle had made it simple for him to eliminate their enemies. She gazed at him with a puzzled expression, then explained that he had launched an unprovoked attack against her, leaving her with no option but to step in and fight back. He instructed her to continue offering her assistance, just as she had been doing. The cult leader, Celtic, entered the area and observed the situation. He remarked on the challenge of figuring out's true nature, then turned to and questioned whether he had committed an act of betrayal against them. Celtic's lips curled into a dark smile as he remarked that the souls of the 5 who perished in sorrow, betrayed by those they trusted, were actually quite impressive. The treachery's turmoil, combined with the spirit of the honorable Nidus, would surely bring even greater satisfaction to their master. The Nidus quickly understands that her adversary possesses expert-level skills, and she wishes she had asked for backup before arriving at this place. The Nidus understood that her skills had only reached the level of a mid-tier expert, making it clear to her that taking on Celtic by herself was out of the question. She chose to launch the first assault, aiming to create an opportunity to attack as soon as a gap appeared in their enemy's defenses. The Nidus lunged at Celtic with great force, and the sound of their swords crashing together echoed through the air. Celtic skillfully intercepted her strike and delivered a powerful kick that sent her stumbling back. The impact hurled her backward through the air. The Nidus lunged forward once more, striking out in his direction, yet he slipped out of harm's way with little effort. Celtic's lips curled into a wicked grin as he himself to strike once more, his overwhelming strength leaving the Nidus stunned and fearful. At that decisive instant, enveloped in a shimmering blue glow, he darted forward with astonishing swiftness. Stepped forward and called forth his powerful storm ability, disrupting the situation. He raised his sword and struck at Celtic's neck. Though agony shot through Celtic, he grit his teeth and held on. When Celtic was struck, the necklace around his neck began to glow brightly. He glanced down at the luminous relic attached to his robe, a cunning smile spreading across his face as he acknowledged that the artifact had saved his life. The clash between the two fighters erupted into a swift and intense duel. Celtic unleashed strikes powered by a vivid red aura, while Lance responded with equally fierce moves, his form surrounded by a glowing blue energy. Realized he was in a perilous predicament, acknowledging the threat since he was unable to foresee Celtic's sword's movements. He also questioned internally how that woman had been able to withstand him for such an extended period. The Nidus suddenly emerged from behind Celtic and attempted a sneak attack. However, Celtic reacted quickly and successfully defended himself. His blonde hair disheveled, shouted at in confusion, demanding to know his intentions. Felt a wave of confusion wash over her as she wondered why a sword aura that appeared so vibrant and unusual could lack true strength, even if its movements were difficult to anticipate. Celtic ridiculed him, claiming that possessing a colored aura was meaningless, and dismissing him as an inexperienced swordsman incapable of understanding the true essence of the blade. He responded with a powerful assault that caused the Nidus to howl in agony. Celtic faced, his gaze filled with a sinister light, as he silently signaled goodbye and prepared to strike the last, decisive attack. Celtic's harsh words ignited Sanger, bringing back memories of his days under Count Cassius's command, and reminding him of the time he earned the esteemed title of, a role valued for its tactical importance. Blood seeped from his lips as he stared down his adversary, daring them to reveal whether their strength was just as inexperienced as his own. Revealed a fresh skill, which he named Aura Thread. Celtic stared in shock, realizing that strength had changed dramatically from what it had been before. With delicate strands of blue energy, initiated an intricate assault, quietly scoffing at those who had dismissed him as an inexperienced swordsman unable to grasp the essence of the blade. Celtic found themselves overwhelmed by the sudden surge of strength displayed before them. The sword thread sliced through his neck, causing his head to separate from his body as he collapsed lifelessly to the earth. Fell to his knees, his body racked with violent coughs as blood spilled from his mouth. The blonde Nidus remained frozen in disbelief, struggling to process the situation, and turned to, wanting to know his true identity. Despite his heavy breathing and growing fatigue, paid no attention to her pleas. Driven by determination, he pushed forward toward Celtic's lifeless form, clinging to the hope that he would discover the object he sought. Arrived at his journey's end, where he discovered a small box holding the coveted elixir. A victorious grin spread across his face as he signaled his success in finding what he had been searching for. Just then, the blonde-haired noticed him and wondered aloud about his actions. Just as was about to finish drinking the elixir, his body gave out and he crumpled to the floor, the elixir slipping from his grasp. The Nidus stood nearby, caught between shock and bewilderment at the sudden turn of events. At that moment, an antique pocket watch slipped beneath the surface of the water, marking the conclusion of his adventure back in time. At that moment, Daisy nervously questioned in her mind the whereabouts of the person she affectionately referred to as her brother. Daisy was overwhelmed with remorse as she approached, inquiring anxiously about his location because she longed for a chance to apologize. However, could only admit that he had no idea where it was. Daisy made her way to his room, her mind filled with the hope that he had come back. As she pushed open the door, an intense surge of shock coursed through her at the sight before her. She discovered sprawled motionless on the ground, his body smeared with blood. A terrified scream tore from her lips as she dashed over to him, calling out his name in panic. Later that night, rested quietly in his bed. Requested that Daisy inform him when he regained consciousness, and she promised she would remain with him the entire time. Daisy observed him quietly, her thoughts heavy with sorrow as she remembered how he used to be the strongest of them all, but now his strength had faded because of their actions. She was overwhelmed with shame, and every time misfortune struck him, she secretly longed for her own end. Without warning, jolted awake, breaths coming in sharp pants as his eyes darted to his prosthetic hand in alarm, the memory of leaving the elixir unfinished flashing through his mind. He pushed himself upright in bed, confusion flickering across his face, as he questioned whether the events he remembered had simply been a dream. But the familiar surroundings of his own room quickly confirmed his reality. Daisy glanced at him with concern, her eyes searching for answers as she wondered about his sudden disappearance and his return, stained with blood. Remained wordless, his gaze fixed on her in such an unusual way that she couldn't help but question the reason behind his odd stare. He smiled faintly, and wondered aloud whether she had just referred to him as her brother. Daisy's cheeks flushed with embarrassment as she quickly refuted the suggestion, yet noticed the redness and swelling around her eyes, questioning whether she had been crying. He teased her with a light-hearted question, wondering if she truly cared that much about his well-being. Frustrated, she confessed that she did worry about him and demanded to know if there was anything wrong with being concerned. Expressed his gratitude to her, gently resting a hand on her head while Daisy quietly protested, insisting she had being treated like a child. His lips curved into a smile as he reflected on just how much time had passed since he had last playfully teased her in this way. Without warning, a wave of dizziness washed over him, making him stagger and nearly lose his balance. He let out a pained groan, prompting Daisy to hurry over in concern, her voice filled with worry as she called to him. Despite her anxiety, he tried to comfort her, insisting that the pain wasn't as bad as it seemed. Ran his fingers over his face, his eyes growing wide with shock as the truth settled in. What he had experienced was no mere dream. It was reality, and regret flooded him as he remembered believing that just a single sip could do no harm. Daisy observed a shift in his posture. One after another, his artificial limbs started to detach and drop away. Made it known to everyone that he was back. Daisy stood frozen in disbelief, while his body struggled to cope with the abrupt shift. He fell to the floor once more, while Daisy shouted his name in fear. As regained consciousness, he noticed the children surrounding him, their faces filled with amazement and skepticism as they stared at his newly restored limbs. Slowly blinked awake, his gaze meeting the astonished faces of Daisy and the rest of the group as they all stared at him in disbelief. Inquired about the astonishing event, seeking to understand both how it occurred and what had happened to the man. With composure explained that he had consumed the elixir. This revelation took by surprise, prompting him to exclaim in disbelief and demand clarification. Was truly talking about that fabled potion, the one rumored to be worth over $50,000 for just a single swallow. Requested that everyone hold on, as he needed to check on something before they continued. Rose to his feet while, filled with concern, questioned whether he was okay and capable of moving. Offered reassurance, insisting that he was all right. He admitted that some recovery time might be necessary but assured that there was no real cause for concern. Afterwards, he requested that join him for a short while, and though was hesitant, he eventually consented. Guided toward a weathered stone altar, expressing his strong belief that another elixir rested upon its surface. Surveyed the ruined area, turning to for an explanation. Expressed his disbelief as well, admitting that he, too, found the situation hard to comprehend. Clarified that his desire to verify stemmed from this very reason. Recalled how, on his previous journey, he had noticed an unusual number of guards gathered in this very spot. He realized that the altar held the secret to unlocking a hidden chamber. The moment he inserted the key, a glowing magical circle appeared and uncovered a hidden doorway. They stared in disbelief at the unexpected sight before them. The room overflowed with glittering gold coins, each one adding up to a fortune valued in the thousands. Alongside relics from long ago, there were also blades, protective gear, and enchanted instruments. Struggled to make sense of the situation, turning to in confusion and seeking an explanation for both the mysterious events and the sudden restoration of his limbs. Expressed his disbelief as well, then astonished everyone by revealing that he had been to this place 10,000 years earlier. Stared in disbelief, unable to process the surprise that had overtaken him. At that moment, became certain that he had truly traveled through time. He understood that if the artifacts he owned could be used more than once, and if he had the ability to travel back to the past repeatedly, nothing would be out of his reach. Shifted his attention to, and explained that he needed to take care of something before proceeding. At the same time, felt completely at ease, convinced that this was how life was meant to be. He found himself curious about the exciting adventures that might unfold for him that day. He made up his mind to visit a person he often referred to as the Wreck. As approached the doorway, he was caught off guard to find already waiting for him. Wanted to know whether he had personally come out to greet them. He stared in disbelief, trying to comprehend how his limbs had somehow been restored. Overcome by fear, urgently instructed his companions to escape at once and deliver the news to their master that had reclaimed his core. He insisted they scatter in all directions and move with all possible speed. Just as they tried to flee, unsheathed his sword and struck at them with impressive speed and force. Just as the attack neared, it suddenly divided into two separate assaults. As his comrades attempted to escape, they were both struck. Stared in disbelief, unable to comprehend how such a thing could occur. Summoned his aura threads and charged straight at his opponent. Quickly collected himself, casting a dismissive glance as he realized that relied on delicate strands of aura rather than wielding the more formidable full aura blade. He realized this indicated that his core was still not completely healed. Shot back with defiance, questioning what difference it made. Commanded to brace himself and take the hit. Boasted with pride that he had changed since 3 years ago, now claiming noble status as a blood relative of the Count. Proudly described how his exceptional physique and remarkable healing power kept him from death, and explained that this ability became even more potent when enhanced by his aura, which resembled that of a vampire. Brimming with self-assurance, launched his formidable red strike, certain that his skill was enough to overcome even the most skilled. In the following instant, was overwhelmed by utter disbelief. The strike slipped past his blade, ricocheted toward him, and sliced cleanly through his neck, taking off his head. His detached head tumbled onto the earth, while his body started to dissolve into mist, vanishing in a way reminiscent of how slain vampires disappear. Realized that, despite his core being restored, he still faced the task of gathering the fragments of his scattered aura. During their conversation later on, Daisy wondered aloud whether the rumors were true about journeying into the past after consuming the elixir. Agreed with her and went on to reveal that he had journeyed through time by using the royal treasure belonging to the family. Wondered aloud whether it was possible to journey back to the past once more. In response, admitted his uncertainty, explaining that the mysterious artifact had remained inactive ever since, and he was still clueless about how the book had managed to transport him through time initially. Milan, the young heir of the family, stepped forward and suggested that if the treasure turned out to be a relic from the age of magic, there could be a chance. Found it hard to believe that something so tiny could hold such incredible divine power. Daisy questioned the timeline of the elixir, noting that since it was only found 2 centuries earlier, it would have been impossible for it to have consumed it 10,000 years in the past. In that moment, came to understand what was really happening. He realized that the cause was his having consumed only half the elixir before coming back. Wondered aloud whether any documents noted that just half of the elixir had ever been discovered. In response, admitted that he had never come across any information specifying the amount that was found. Realized it was impossible to determine whether the whole bottle was meant to be found. There was also the possibility that the course of history shifted after he consumed half of the drink, resulting in only the leftover portion eventually being found. Observed that one undeniable truth remained. If he were able to revisit the past, the choices he made there might alter the entire course of the world. Wondered aloud what hoped to accomplish if he were given this chance. After taking a brief pause to consider the situation, announced that his main objective was to seek justice for his family, who had been taken from him in a single night. His other purpose centered on upholding his responsibility as the sole surviving heir of the royal lineage. Went on to share that his deepest ambition revolved around bringing the kingdom back to its former glory. Before anything else could happen, it was necessary for Count Cassius to meet his end. Recalled the days when he thought that pledging loyalty to the Lord of Kushan was the only way to protect his loved ones. He came to understand, though not soon enough, that relying on happiness taken from others would always be uncertain and fragile. Milan cautioned him about the formidable strength of Count Cassius. She explained that he had already achieved the rank of, and his true abilities remained a mystery since he gained the pure blood of. Made it clear there was no choice in the matter, warning that someone as unpredictable as Cassius could take extreme actions if he found out about the recovery. Because of this, he explained to them that facing this battle was something he could not escape. He went on to remind the group that they needed to turn in the tax report to the Count no later than 3 weeks from now. They understood that resolving the issue was necessary before the deadline arrived. Kept to himself, dedicating long hours to solitary training. The character was striving to perfect the ancient sword technique, once wielded by the cult leader a millennium ago. He remembered the way that style remained severe and unbending. The atmosphere was charged with a sharp, piercing energy. The cult leader's mocking remarks lingered in his thoughts, reminding him of his failure to grasp the true essence of the sword. He was merely an inexperienced swordsman. At last, grasped what those words truly meant. The lesson was not about speaking to the sword, but about, and the blade merging into a single being. Having come to understand this new truth, grew convinced that the force he had encountered before was far from a normal aura. His practice came to a sudden halt when Daisy burst in, her voice raised in alarm as she announced that a disaster had occurred. The matter was related to Count Cassius. At the same time, inside the Count's grand castle, a loyal servant approached the Count to let him know that his family had been invited to visit the castle 3 days from then. Count Cassius stated that his patience with the nobles had finally run out. It was now time for the individuals to be offered up as sacrifices. Met with his friends to talk about the unexpected invitation they had received, which had arrived just 3 weeks ahead of the tax report deadline. Questioned internally whether the Count had discovered that was back in control of his body and had defeated. However, brushed off his concerns, believing the Count would attribute death to the actions of the rebels instead. She clarified that the real issue was not what he thought. Instead, the unexpected invitation had disrupted their plot to kill him. She explained that their sole opportunity would come during the Count's ritual, when they could launch their attack. When inquired about the rituals, revealed that ever since the Count had been injured, he departed from the castle by himself every month to carry out the ceremonies in solitude. Daisy mentioned witnessing Cassius men as they took children away against their will. Revealed that villages unable to pay taxes were being destroyed, with the bodies of their residents, including children, used as offerings in the rituals. Could hardly believe it when he discovered that Cassius was arranging both corpses and living people as offerings to some mysterious force, and it became clear to him that they could no longer remember Cassius as the person he once was. He reflected with sorrow on how much had transformed during the time he was powerless and hurt. He wondered aloud how he'd come to possess so much knowledge. Responded with composure, explaining that she relied on information gathered by her own sources. His concern grew as he admonished her in his mind for venturing by herself into a city known for its dangers. Cut him off with frustration, pointing out that their scheme had fallen apart. Stood up for her, explaining that she had turned 20 and was considered an adult. Daisy, filled with worry, questions ability to defeat Cassius. Asserted with determination that he needed to take this action, believing that holding the sword gave him a genuine opportunity for success. Baelshin identified the object right away and clarified that it belonged to the king, calling it the royal sword. Revealed that the sword had been crafted from a rare silver steel that had descended from the heavens and was shaped using powerful aura. It was believed that creatures tainted by corruption, such as vampires, were unable to endure its presence. declared her intention to place her trust in him, then lightened the mood with a playful remark about how, if things went wrong, at least they would face the consequences together. Felt his irritation rise as he listened to her gloomy remarks. She first brushed off her words as a joke, but then her expression grew serious once more as she insisted that they had to find an alternative method to eliminate the Count. Wrapped up the conversation, explaining that although their plan was risky, it remained the sole choice available to them at the moment. The story then moves to a peaceful village known as. The group of children spent their time joyfully, each showing off the mushrooms they had collected and eagerly examining which ones were the biggest. One child dashed forward with excitement, proposing that they should measure the mushrooms once they got back home. Without any sign or hint, flames burst forth and swept through the village. The children froze, their faces filled with fear and confusion as they tried to make sense of the unfolding events. The soldiers, their faces hidden behind skull-shaped helmets and clad in heavy armor, stormed into the village and mercilessly slaughtered its inhabitants. They loaded the corpses of those they had slain onto carts. The children quickly caught the attention of the soldiers. Instructions were issued to ensure that none of them would be allowed to get away. The soldiers moved in on the frightened children, closing the circle around them as they approached. Before the soldiers could be reached, a sudden barrage of arrows soared through the air and hit their marks. A mysterious man emerged and inquired about the children's well-being. The young boy looked up and wondered aloud about the stranger's identity. The man stated that his name was. The children quietly murmured his name among themselves, while one young boy, eyes wide with surprise, wondered aloud whether the man might be a baron. Assured the children that he would give them answers at another time. For the moment, escaping the village was their top priority. The children, overwhelmed with fear and sorrow, stood their ground. They wailed loudly, their faces streaked with tears, desperately gesturing toward the place where their mothers remained, unwilling to abandon them. Understood that taking out a handful of soldiers would do nothing to halt the ongoing slaughter. He whispered under his breath, filled with remorse, believing the Count had crossed a line. At the same time, at the Count's castle, several carts filled with corpses pulled up to the entrance. A soldier approached his master and reported that 116 bodies had been delivered, which was more than what was needed for that day. The Count revealed himself in a form reminiscent of a vampire and instructed his followers to depart, assuring them that he would take care of matters on his own. The Count expected that children would come to the castle the following day. Wearing a wicked grin, he revealed that the much-anticipated time had at last arrived. The Count commenced his mysterious ceremonies, channeling an unusual force from the corpses. He was struck by a sense of unease and swiftly yanked the cover away from one of the carts. The Count's eyes widened in shock when an unforeseen assault took him by surprise. The story shifted back to an earlier moment where outlined her strategy. She shared her knowledge that the remains from village were scheduled to be transported by cart later that day. She instructed to act like he was dead and secretly slip inside one of the carts. By doing this, he would find himself taken straight to the Count. He needed to hold back his power until the right time, planning to attack when his opponent least expected it. Unexpectedly stood before the Count, who, caught off guard by sudden appearance, questioned him in a sarcastic tone about the reason for his unannounced visit. Understood that the task ahead would be challenging. The Count expressed his pleasure at seeing the man restored to health and speculated with curiosity about whether he had discovered some kind of miraculous cure. In that instant, understood that planning had reached its limit. From here on, victory would depend on his ability to battle and succeed. The Count himself to face the upcoming conflict. He silently wished that would reveal a breathtaking display of sorrow. Concentrated intently, sharpening every sense. He sensed that he was now able to understand the true essence of the sword. Moved quickly, striking with sudden force. At the same time, the Count sent out powerful surges of crimson energy. Managed to evade the incoming strikes with only a fraction of a second to spare. The Count allowed no time for reaction, darting toward him with astonishing swiftness that inspired fear. Attempted to withdraw once more, but this action led to an intense confrontation. concentrated his energy around his sword, and launched a relentless assault in the Count's direction. The Count acknowledged to himself that this attack had been remarkable. It was clear that if his aura had been just a bit less powerful, he would have lost his head. With a cunning grin, he remarked that such talent was exactly what he anticipated from a person hailing from the kingdom. Felt shock ripple through him upon realizing that the Count had uncovered who he truly was. The Count went on to reveal that could only be the missing second prince of, whose disappearance had remained a mystery because his body was never discovered. The Count considered to be an unusual and remarkable find. The figure explained to him that by surrendering his cherished soul as an offering, he would undoubtedly gain the chance to achieve his deepest wish. Reacted by initiating a new assault. The Count effortlessly deflected the attack, explaining that any further efforts would be pointless since the sword was incapable of breaking through his protective aura. His gaze burned with intense concentration. His blue energy collided with the Count's red aura, resulting in a tremendous burst of power. In another location, assembled his group of followers. Someone wondered aloud about the reason behind the unexpected call. Explained that, based on the information he had gathered, he anticipated an unusual event was imminent. One of subordinates inquired about the type of information he had obtained. Without warning, a brilliant burst of energy lit up the distant horizon, causing the men to stare in fear and question the source of the mysterious phenomenon. They immediately identified the shining light of the red blade as the unmistakable aura belonging to Count Cassius. He became curious about the identity of his opponent. Raised the binoculars to her eyes, curiosity piqued as she tried to identify the person brave enough to attempt such a daring act. One of his men glanced over. He spotted the other fighter and, stunned, quietly mouthed the name. The rest of the group remained skeptical, questioning among themselves whether it was really back to his old self. Recalled How had cautioned him that this was his final opportunity, making it clear there would be no more chances after this one. Encouraged to carefully consider his options, reminding him that choosing to act now could open new doors, while letting the chance slip away might leave him with lasting remorse. At the same time, his mind filled with uncertainty as she questioned whether really had it in him to take the Count's life. He believed that, despite being a rebel force, their greatest achievement would only be rescuing a handful of children, and aligning with, at this point, would lead them all to their deaths. One of his men wondered aloud whether they were simply expected to remain passive and observe the situation unfold. Reached a conclusion and declared that action was necessary. He then gave his men a look that suggested he regretted putting them at risk. The focus shifted once more to the ongoing fight. And the Count clashed fiercely, trading powerful strikes back and forth. Himself to strike again, gathering every ounce of his strength for the next attack. Let out a fierce cry while launching yet another strike. The Count did not expect the sudden assault, and shock swept across his face. The blow struck him, opening a wound on his neck that began to bleed. Seized by uncontrollable anger, the Count unleashed a curse upon. He struggled to stay upright, his body nearly giving out from sheer exhaustion. Clutching his injury, the Count conceded that skill with a sword was remarkable. He believed that one day he could break through the other's defenses if he managed to confront him before anyone else did. Afterward, the Count called upon his legion of vampire servants, commanding them to launch an assault against. A horde of vampires charged in his direction. Realized he was encircled on all sides by a horde of vampires. He grew irritated, realizing his carefully laid plan to confront the Count by slipping in with the dead had been ruined. Came to understand that the enemies kept appearing without end. He seemed so worn out that, if things continued like this, he might faint from tiredness before ever making it to the Count. A vampire lunged at, yet he slipped out of harm's way with ease. Determined that he would swiftly deal with the remaining pursuers. Just as one of the attackers was about to seize him, a silver arrow shot through the air and struck its target. The vampires stared in astonishment, trying to figure out where the silver arrow, glowing with a strange aura, had come from. The Count's mind burned with anger as he questioned the identity of the person bold enough to disrupt his plans. stepped into view with his bow in hand. He was not by himself, appeared as well addressing as his brother. Had not expected to encounter, and the unexpected meeting caught him off guard. The unexpected appearance of, and Daisy brought an added layer of astonishment. Even Cyclone, who served as deputy, took command of his knights and charged into the fray. As his men, he pointed out that every villain seeking their demise had assembled there, and he commanded his soldiers to eliminate every last one of them. As took charge of the fight by directing her team, aimed his bow with unwavering focus, sending arrows that struck down vampires one by one. Daisy and Cyclone stood their ground, facing the vampires with unwavering courage. Glanced nervously at his friends, his worry clear as he questioned the reason for their presence, afraid that danger might befall them. Daisy questioned his habit of handling things by himself and pointed out that they were both grown-ups, implying he didn't have to face everything on his own. She emphasized that everyone needed to face this challenge as a united group. Agreed with what she had just said and instructed to concentrate solely on keeping track of the count. Glanced at the people beside him and, grinning, understood that he shouldn't view them as powerless kids right now. Directed his gaze at the count. He summoned all his courage, clutching his sword with unwavering resolve as he prepared to confront the foe standing in his way. The count flashed a sinister grin as he announced his intention to start by ripping his arm from his body. The count's hand morphed into a massive crimson claw, which he used to launch a fierce attack. Lance defended himself by activating a necklace, which released a radiant golden shield to block the attack. Suddenly the barrier burst apart with tremendous force, hurling the count backward through the air. His face reflected utter disbelief as he tried to make sense of the sudden events. At the same moment, the count stared in horror, only just grasping that the blast had cost him his hand. Raised his voice, informing him that the object in question was a protection necklace. As he stared at the broken necklace in his palm, clarified that he had discovered the artifact in ancient ruins. Although he felt remorse for having destroyed it, he acknowledged that the necklace had fulfilled its intended role. Pointed out that whenever a full-force assault took place, it inevitably left a weakness in the line of defense. The opening in the action gave him the ideal chance to use his secret weapon, something he had kept hidden until now. Gathered every ounce of his strength, channeling his determination until his spirit and the essence of his sword became one. A tremendous vortex of blue energy erupted forth. The count, filled with rage, let out a furious bellow as crimson energy erupted from him. Determined that would meet his end in this place, the attacker lunged fiercely toward the swirling chaos. Despite the oncoming assault, the whirlwind swallowed it whole, remaining completely unharmed. Through relentless and forceful strikes, succeeded in breaking the count's aura just enough to open a small fissure around his neck. Through that opening, something managed to slip by. Struck with a powerful final attack. The count collapsed onto the floor, exhaling one final breath before becoming still. He tried to make sense of the impact, questioning whether the soul blade was responsible for what struck him. Explained that his intention had been to combine the ancient sword's energy with the power of the aura blade. He also found himself questioning whether this truly was the legendary soul blade that represented the Grand Master's authority. Without warning, the Count's loyal vampires suffered injuries and started collapsing one by one. His group looked on in bewilderment, struggling to understand what mysterious force had struck their enemies. Came to the conclusion that was truly responsible for the Count's death. Walked up to, struggling to accept that he had truly managed to overcome the Count. He explained that the records indicated vampires without their master would typically lose their sanity for a day or two. Wondered aloud whether things would go back to how they used to be, and assured him they would, noting that this moment offered an opportunity to get rid of what was left behind. Assured everyone that he and his team would handle the rest of the vampires before the night was over. Showed no hesitation in accepting the proposal right away. Moved ahead and conveyed heartfelt thanks too, showing deep appreciation for the opportunity to seek justice for their fallen friends. Expressed their gratitude for his help, and proposed that they join forces to improve life in the city. Following this, showed the family crest and mentioned that he originally intended to inform at a later time, but unexpected circumstances forced him to reveal it sooner. 3 centuries earlier, his ancestors had belonged to the noble class of, as he recounted. He handed the crest over to. From that moment forward, he pledged his loyalty and vowed to serve him as his lord. Later, had a conversation with. During their exchange, remarked that she wouldn't have been surprised if had even revealed his family crest. Wondered aloud whether she was familiar with, prompting her to admit that she had some knowledge of him, clarifying that much of what she knew came from the help she received from him and his team. Could hardly believe it when he discovered that she had risked everything by working secretly with his faction. Despite his disbelief, she maintained that her involvement was minor, claiming she had offered them only minimal assistance. Proposed shifting their attention away from the remaining vampires, trusting to handle them, so they could concentrate on uncovering proof of the Count's wicked actions. She clarified that damaging the Count's reputation would increase their backing from the townspeople. Found himself in agreement with her, coming to the understanding that, now that Cassius was gone, they required the backing of Kushan's people to maintain control over the city. Without delay, an investigation group was assembled, bringing together both merchant and citizen representatives to collect proof, while examining the castle church. Observed the surroundings and noted that nothing about the place stood out to her. Shared her opinion, finding himself in agreement with her assessment. Despite stumbling upon a frightening, eerie stone statue, directed its attention her way and gestured toward the necklace hanging around his neck, silently questioning him about it. Without warning, the necklace that had once obtained started to emit a bright light. He couldn't help but question the reason behind its mysterious glow at that particular moment. Retrieved the Book of Fate, and once again a green light radiated from its cover, just like it had earlier. Noticed the familiar book and encouraged to attempt opening it. Firmly declined, his worry about being transported back in time resurfacing. He clarified that his absence would trigger a scramble among various groups, each eager to take control of the region. Seiya nodded in agreement and pressed him to conceal the book without delay. Before he had a chance to act, the book sprang open by itself, displaying a passage that spoke of the Lord of the Clear Sky's return alongside the cult's lost treasure. The royal seal glowed brightly once more, and suddenly was transported to a previous moment in time. He realized he was seated on a cart that was rolling forward. He found himself standing in a field, uncertain of his current location. He realized that he belonged to a group once more. Sensed a heavy weight bearing down on him as he sat across from the robed figure. He soon discovered that his strength surpassed that of anyone he had ever encountered. The stranger addressed him as, and inquired if he had regained consciousness. Realized that this man possessed a power and presence far beyond that of the cult leader he had encountered before. His presence radiated more than just sheer strength. Mana energy from all directions spun violently around him, forming a phenomenon that even a Grand Master would struggle to understand. The man explained that their meeting had been a coincidence, and that he had chosen to make the boy his disciple. Came to understand that, in this moment from the past, he was meant to be the student of the enigmatic figure before him. One of the escorts turned to his master and inquired about when the boy had become his disciple. In response, the master explained that he had personally noticed the boy's potential and had decided to take him in just a week earlier. The master acknowledged the situation, clarifying that he had actually brought the person there a week earlier. A sense of curiosity filled them as they reflected on the oddness of this encounter, feeling as though fate itself had arranged it. Found himself confused by the stranger's behavior, noticing how it sharply contrasted with the welcoming attitude of the cult members, who had accepted him without hesitation. The man revealed his identity as Grand Duke Celsius, and shared that he had always dreamed of ridding the world of cult members. He shifted his attention to, referring to him as Van, and recalled aloud that had joined him as his disciple just 1 week earlier. He informed the other that they were traveling to his castle, where the lessons would soon begin. Found it curious that the Duke chose to speak to him so kindly while describing the circumstances. The Duke conveyed his enthusiasm for working alongside others to reach their shared goals. Without warning, an unsettling idea crept into his thoughts as he questioned whether the Duke had uncovered who he really was. It became clear to them just how unusual the entire situation was. Despite the Duke's uncharacteristically kind manner, couldn't shake the feeling that the Duke was hiding some knowledge from him. At the same time, the second felt a deep sense of pride as he traveled alongside his master. Chose to challenge the Duke by questioning his certainty, pointing out that the Duke was making a decision without even understanding his own identity. The Duke acknowledged that the situation truly was peculiar. However, they made it clear that one thing was certain. He considered that if the current situation matched his ambitions, it might be the result of a decision he had made in the distant past. Remained confused by the Duke's words, so the Duke clarified that he wasn't certain himself. It was simply an instinct he couldn't ignore. Remained quiet, his mind turning over what the word, feeling, might signify in this particular situation. He sensed his sanity slipping as the circumstances pushed him to the brink. He stared, bewildered, trying to make sense of the strange situation unfolding before him. The cart rolled onward, eventually arriving at an enormous castle constructed from shimmering steel. Found himself questioning how he had arrived in such an unusual place, under such strange circumstances. The Duke explained that he lived in a city known for its luminous nights and shining steel. He told him that, despite holding the title of Grand Duke, he entrusted most responsibilities of leadership to his servants and chose, instead, to dedicate his time to educating the youth. As they traveled together, came to understand that the Duke was cleverly guiding him through the traditions and manners typical of that distant time period. With time, slowly became accustomed to living in this era. Unable to find a way back to his own world, he realized his only option was to concentrate on the life he was living now. Observed that this time period possessed remarkable expertise in both skills and sword fighting. He made up his mind to use his stay in this place as an opportunity to learn and grow, just as he had done in the past. At the same time, the Duke informed him that there was already another student residing in the castle they were traveling toward. The Duke went on to describe this boy as hardworking and deeply committed to doing what was right, assuring him that their meeting would take place in the near future. Nodded in silence, his gaze fixed on the massive castle that loomed ahead of them. When arrived, he was taken aback to discover the other disciple present. The person standing before him was the blonde-haired Nidus, someone had encountered during his earlier trip to the past, and Nidus appeared equally startled to see there. The Duke observed how they responded and inquired whether they were already acquainted. The Nidus agreed and brought up the memory of the man who had assisted her in the cult church nearly a year earlier, revealing that the man had actually been. The Duke recalled a tale he once heard about a man who wielded his sword in an unusual way. The Duke seemed pleased to learn that they were already acquainted. He informed the Nidus that would now be her junior and requested that, as his senior, she help guide him moving forward. The Nidus reacted with surprise to the request, her thoughts turning to what it meant for him to be her junior. Meanwhile, the Duke explained his choice, mentioning that although he had already accepted as a disciple, his recent schedule had left him with little time. For this reason, the responsibility of guiding him fell to her for the foreseeable future. The Duke then requested permission to go ahead, mentioning that he needed to speak privately with the sorcerers waiting within. Was stunned by the unexpected encounter, finding it incredibly odd that their paths had crossed once more in this very location. It was revealed that she had become the Grand Duke's apprentice. Approached with a friendly smile, reaching out his hand to show how glad he was to see her again. However, before he could finish, she cut him off abruptly, demanding to know what he was attempting. She reprimanded him, questioning whether his behavior was appropriate for addressing a superior. Hadn't expected her to be so firm and orderly, and her rigid sense of discipline caught him off guard. The Nidus spoke with grave sincerity, making it clear to him that whatever his past had been, from now on, only the two of them would be recognized as the Master's disciples. She wondered aloud whether she had made a mistake, prompting to reluctantly acknowledge that her perspective was correct. She explained that to avoid dishonoring their master, they needed to be mindful of everything they did. She stressed the importance of looking refined at all times and behaving with grace, She proceeded to reprimand him for his unkempt appearance, questioning how long it had been since he had taken the time to shine his shoes. Someone noticed that his cloak was draped unevenly and drew attention to it. He noted that his hair was unkempt and in need of attention. She finished her remarks by noting that, dressed like that, he could easily be mistaken for a bandit. The knightess caught eyes drifting toward her hair, and with irritation demanded to know the reason for his repeated stares. Couldn't help but think, with a hint of sarcasm, how someone with such a peculiar hairstyle could possibly criticize him. She softly ran her fingers through her hair, which left visibly nervous and unsettled. She hurried off, her face flushed with embarrassment, as the other knights murmured among themselves about her habit of constantly pointing out mistakes in others. Witnessing this, couldn't help but smile to himself. Later on, at the training ground, the knightess stepped forward and announced her name to everyone as Serum. She revealed her identity as a knight serving in the Grand Duke's private guard, belonging to the elite group known as the Horizon Knight Squad. Acknowledged to herself that could possibly surpass her in strength. She went on to explain that their master had informed her he still struggled to manage his sword energy effectively. She explained that mastering swordsmanship requires first-hand experience in real battles. Unsheathed her sword and signaled for it to do the same, announcing that the moment had come for the experienced mentor to instruct her younger counterpart in the basics of sword fighting. Understood that their true purpose for coming to the training ground had just become clear to him. Meanwhile, firmly that her actions were motivated by any lingering frustration or humiliation from before. She requested that he not take her actions the wrong way. Gave a silent nod and unsheathed his sword, believing that actions spoke louder than words when blades were involved.